The tectonic plate beneath the mountainous region of northern Japan screamed, as the reality of the world was forcibly rewritten. It was not the grinding sound of earth moving against stone, but the high-pitched shriek of atmospheric pressure collapsing in on itself. A vacuum implosion that shattered the eardrums of every living creature within a 10-mile radius. Trees that had stood for centuries were not merely uprooted but atomized, their organic matter instantly converted into data-like particles before fading into a grey, suffocating mist. The patrol of lower-ranked demon slayers, stationed at the perimeter of the Nataguma range, never had time to draw their Nichiren blades. They did not die from a slash, a poison, or a curse. They simply ended. Their bodies were overwhelmed by a wave of despair so potent, it stopped their hearts before the physical shockwave turned their bones to powder. This was not the work of a demon. No blood demon art in the history of the Hidden War had ever carried this specific frequency of absolute death. It was the intrusion of a foreign god, a violent graft of one dimension onto another. In the epicenter of the crater, where a mountain peak had existed seconds prior, the air shimmered with a violet, toxic radiance. The Great Tomb of Nazarick had not landed gently. It had been surgically scarred onto the fabric of the Taisho era, rejecting the natural laws of physics. The sky above bruised purple, unnatural thunderheads swirling in a vortex that defied the wind direction, casting a pool of twilight over the midday sun. The sacred wisteria trees, known for their warding properties against the demonic, turned black and crumbled into dry rot as the passive aura of the overlord washed over them. This was the first strategic catastrophe. The natural immune system of the world was being bypassed. The flowers did not repel this evil. They died in its presence. Miles away, inside the labyrinthine dimension of the Infinity Castle, the biophysical reaction was instantaneous. Kibutsuji Muzan, the progenitor of all demons, froze mid-step while mixing chemical reagents. The absolute control he held over his cells, a network of dominance stretching across the country, experienced a violent static interference. It was not fear he felt initially, but a biological error message. Something had just appeared on the board that possessed a soul signature so dense and cold that it had eclipsed his own presence like a supernova swallowing a candle. For the first time in 1,000 years, the predator felt the sudden, chilling draft of an open door in a room that was supposed to be sealed. The blood in his veins boiled, not with anger, but with the instinctive recoil of a localized infection, meeting a broad-spectrum antibiotic. At the Ubayashiki estate, Kagaya Ubayashiki collapsed into the arms of his wife, coughing violently. The curse that ravaged his body flared with unprecedented agony, but his blind eyes saw the shift clearly. The future he had been navigating, the delicate threads of fate leading toward Muzan's defeat, had been severed. In their place stood a wall of darkness so absolute that no prophecy could penetrate it. He realized with a sinking heart that the war between humans and demons had just been rendered insignificant. A third player had entered the game, one who did not care for their rules of sunlight and breathing techniques. Back at the impact site, the dust began to settle, revealing the architecture of the invaders. Walls of obsidian and unknown alloys rose from the displacement zone, guarded by statues that seemed to weep blood. A single crow, the sole survivor of the Kasugai flock that had been patrolling the sector, struggled to stay airborne against the updraft of negative energy. Its eyes, wide with avian terror, recorded the movement of shadows that were not cast by the sun. These shadows detached themselves from the walls, moving with a fluid rigidity that suggested heavy armor and lifeless animation. They were Death Knights, level 35 defenders, reacting to the stimulus of a new world with default aggression protocols. To the terrified crow, they looked like demons of an unknown caste, towering brutes with roaring shields, but they lacked the scent of human consumption. They smelled only of dust and the grave. The bird banked sharply, its instinct driving it toward the Slayer headquarters, with a message that would shatter the fragile stalemate of the era. The balance of power had not shifted. It had been decapitated. Momonga, now known as Ainz Ooal Gown, sat upon the throne of kings, his skeletal fingers gripping the gilded armrests with enough force to create hairline fractures in the divine class artifact. The vibration that had shaken the Great Tomb of Nazarick had ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against the sensory inputs of the NPCs gathered before him. The red light in his eye sockets flared, a visual manifestation of the panic suppression system, forcing his mind into a state of icy calculation. He was not supposed to be here. The plan had been to fortify their position in the Sorcerer Kingdom, to expand their influence slowly. But the world outside had shifted. The connection to his summons in the surrounding areas had been severed instantly, a psychic amputation that left him blind to his perimeter. He looked down at Albedo, the overseer of the Guardians, whose wings twitched with an agitation she struggled to suppress. Her golden eyes were wide, fixed on him, waiting for a decree that would make sense of the chaos. Ainz cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the vast, vaulted chamber. He ordered the immediate deployment of the 8 edge assassins to the surface, his voice steady despite the internal screaming of his human psyche. He needed eyes. He needed to know if this was an attack by other players, a world item effect, or a random cosmic displacement. Within minutes, the first reports filtered back through the mental link, not from the assassins, but from Maribello Fiore on the 6th floor. The dark elf sounded terrified, his voice trembling as he described the sky. It was not the sky of the new world. The constellations were different. The mana density in the atmosphere was thin, almost choking, polluted with a strange spiritual residue that tasted like old blood. Ainz stood up, his black robes billowing around him as if caught in a phantom wind. He commanded the Guardians to remain at level 1 alert. No one was to leave the tomb without his direct permission. He would go to the surface himself. The transition from the throne room to the surface was a journey through a fortress preparing for war. The halls of Nazarick buzzed with the movement of high-level vassals, their armor clanking in rhythmic unison. When Ainz stepped out into the amphitheater of the surface, the air hit him first. It was cold, carrying the scent of pine and distinct unmasked ozone. It smelled like Japan. The realization struck him with the force of a bludgeoning weapon. The geography was wrong, the mountains jagged and unfamiliar, but the flora was undeniably native to Earth. Had he returned? No. His skeletal hand rose to touch his face. He was still the overlord. He looked up. The moon was high and bright, illuminating a landscape of destruction. Nazarick had not arrived peacefully. The tomb had displaced millions of tons of rock, erasing a mountain peak and creating a plateau of death in the middle of a dense forest. At the edge of the crater, where the crushed earth met the surviving tree line, the first contact occurred. It was not a grand diplomatic meeting, but a slaughter. A squad of 10 demon slayers, ranked Mizunoto, had been patrolling the base of the mountain when the impact occurred. They had rushed up the slope, their breathing techniques enhancing their stamina, expecting to find a demon of the 12 Kazuki. Instead, they found a Death Knight. The summon stood 7 feet tall, a towering bulwark of black metal and rotting rotting flesh, holding a tower shield that pulsed with a dark aura. The Slayers, brave and foolish, attacked. Ainz watched from the ramparts, using a spell of distant vision. He saw the leader of the squad, a young man with a scar across his cheek, lunge forward with a shout, his sword wreathed in the visual metaphor of water. The blade struck the Death Knight's shield and shattered. It did not chip. It disintegrated upon impact with the high-level physical nullification barrier. The Death Knight did not counterattack immediately. It simply stepped forward. The sheer mass of the creature, combined with the despair aura radiating from it, broke the formation. One Slayer fell to his knees, vomiting from the intensity of the fear status effect. The Death Knight's flambege swept out in a horizontal arc, a lazy, testing blow. It bisected 3 men at the waist. Their bodies hit the ground before their blood had time to register the separation. There was no resistance. The biological toughness of these humans was slightly above the average New World peasant, perhaps level 5 or 6, but against a level 35 summon, they were chaff. Ainz observed the slaughter with a detachment that frightened the remnants of Satoru Suzuki. He felt nothing for them. They were combatants who had engaged his forces. In Yggdrasil terms, they were hostile mobs. He noted the swords that carried a solar energy signature. Interesting. If they used solar energy, they were likely hunters of the undead. That made them natural enemies of Nazarick. He ordered the Death Knight to capture the survivor. The creature paused, its blade inches from the neck of the scarred youth, then grabbed him by the head. The Slayer screamed, a sound of raw, unfiltered terror, as he was dragged across the shattered rock toward the entrance of the tomb. Ainz turned to Demiurge, who had materialized beside him, his suit immaculate, his tail swaying with malicious delight. Ainz instructed him to take the prisoner to the frozen prison. He wanted to know everything: the language, the government, the magic system, and the location. Especially the location. Demiurge bowed low, his glasses glinting in the moonlight, interpreting the order as the first step in a grand conquest. Ainz did not correct him. In a situation this volatile, conquest was synonymous with survival. Miles away, the crow that had witnessed the arrival crashed into the courtyard of the Ubayashiki estate. It did not deliver its message with words, for its vocal cords had been shredded by the pressure change. It died upon landing, vomiting a slurry of dark blood onto the white pebbles. Kagaya Ubayashiki, sensing the death of the creature, reached out with a trembling hand. His daughters, white-haired and solemn, described the condition of the bird. Kagaya closed his eyes. The premonition that had struck him earlier solidified into a terrifying certainty. The balance was gone. He summoned his Kasugai crow, a distinct bird with a high intellect, and whispered a command that had not been issued in 400 years. It was a mobilization order for every active pillar. The disaster at Natagumo was not a natural phenomenon. It was an invasion. Back at the exclusion zone, the silence of the forest began to reassert itself. But it was a fearful silence. The insects had stopped singing. The wind seemed afraid to blow. In the shadows of the trees, another observer watched. It was a demon, a low-level servant of Rui, the Lower Moon 5. The demon had a head of a spider and the body of a man, disjointed and grotesque. It had seen the Death Knight. It had seen the humans turn to paste. Its primitive brain, wired for cruelty and hunger, could not process what it was seeing. It knew strength. Master Rui was strong. Lord Muzan was absolute. But this black armored thing was different. It didn't smell like a demon. It smelled like the end of all things. The spider demon turned to flee, to warn its family, but it found its path blocked. Sebastian stood in the clearing. The butler of Nazarick brushed a speck of dust from his glove. He did not look at the monster. He looked through it. The spider demon hissed, ejecting a web of steel hard threads toward the old man. Sebas did not dodge. He simply walked forward. The threads hit his suit and dissolved into harmless strands of silk, failing to penetrate the high-tier cloth armor. The demon shrieked and lunged, mandibles clicking. Sebas caught the creature's face in his hand. He applied a fraction of pressure. The skull collapsed with a wet crunch. Sebas dropped the corpse and took a handkerchief from his pocket, wiping his fingers. He had been sent to scout the perimeter and assess the local fauna. His assessment was disappointed. Weak, aggressive, but weak. However, he noted the regeneration. The crushed head was already bubbling, trying to reform. Sebas frowned. He stomped on the chest cavity, infusing his heel with Kai. The regeneration stopped instantly as the core was obliterated. He made a mental note. The locals possessed high survivability, unless destroyed completely. Ainz retreated to his private quarters to review the intelligence gathered so far. The mirror of remote viewing showed him images of the surrounding country. He saw telegraph lines. He saw steam trains. He saw men in kimono and men in Western suits. Taisho-era Japan. Satoru Suzuki's history lessons came flooding back. This was the dawn of modernization. But the monsters, the Oni, the prisoner, under neuronist interrogation, had broken within minutes. He had babbled about the demon slayer core, about breathing styles, about the 12 Kizuki, and about Kibutsuji Muzan. Ainz sat back, the information coalescing into a tactical map. He was in a world where humanity fought a secret war against biological vampires, and he, an undead overlord, had just landed in the middle of it. To the humans, he was the ultimate demon. To the demons, he was a rival apex predator. There would be no alliances. He decided to test the sunlight theory. The prisoner had claimed demons died in the sun. Ainz was undead. He generally disliked the sun, but it did not kill him due to his passive resistances and gear. However, this world's sun might be different. He ordered a generic zombie summoned from a corpse of the Slayers to be placed outside in a cage as dawn approached. He watched from the safety of the shadows. As the sun crested the horizon, the zombie stood there, unaffected. It moaned, shuffling against the bars. Ainz exhaled a breath he didn't need. The sun was normal. The weakness was specific to the biology of this world's demons. This was a massive strategic advantage. He could operate in daylight. His enemies could not. However, the tranquility of the morning was broken by a sudden flare of energy at the edge of his sensory range. It was fast, much faster than the Slayers from the night before. Ainz focused his attention. Through the eyes of a concealed owl summon, he saw them. Two figures sprinting through the devastation of the Natagumo forest. One was a woman with a butterfly motif haori, moving with a grace that bordered on flight. The other was a man with a mismatched haori and a face of stoic granite. Pillars, the elite. Giyu Tomioka and Shinobu Kocho had arrived. They did not slow down as they approached the Death Knight, still guarding the perimeter. Ainz leaned forward. This was the test. If his level 35 summon could handle the elites of this world, Nazarick was untouchable. If not, he would have to adjust his threat assessment. Giyu Tomioka did not scream. He did not hesitate. He saw the black giant, recognized the threat it posed to the nearby towns, and engaged. He breathed in, the oxygen flooding every cell in his body, pushing his physical limits to the peak of human potential. Total concentration. Breathing. Water breathing. Fourth form. Striking tide. It became a blur of liquid motion. The Death Knight raised its shield, expecting a frontal impact. Giyu wrapped around the shield, his movement defying the creature's tracking speed. The Nichiren blade, blue as the ocean, struck the unarmored joint of the Death Knight's knee. Sparks flew, the blade bit deep, not cutting through the bone, but severing the tendon. The Death Knight roared, stumbling. Shinobu Kocho was already in the air. She knew she could not decapitate such a monstrosity. Her physique was too small, but she didn't need to chop. She needed to pierce. Insect breathing, butterfly dance, caprice. She descended like a hallucination, her rapier stinging the Death Knight 4 times in the neck and eye slits. The blade was coated in a wisteria-based poison, highly concentrated. The Death Knight swatted at her, a blow that would have pulverized a boulder. Shinobu kicked off the flat of the blade, flipping backward. The monster staggered. The poison was entering its system. But the Death Knight was undead. It had immunity to most biological toxins. It shook its head, the roar turning into a gurgle of rage. It was not dying. It was annoyed. Ainz watched, analyzing. The male warrior had speed and cutting power comparable to a level 20 warrior, maybe 25 with that skill boost. The female relied on poison, which was useless against the undead, but her agility was impressive. They were strong, much stronger than the average human, but they were struggling against a single Death Knight. Ainz felt a wave of relief. They were not players. They were natives with a specialized martial art, but he could not let them destroy the Death Knight. It would look weak. He needed to make a statement. He needed to establish the rules of engagement for this new world. Shaltir, Ainz spoke into the air. The true vampire stepped out of a gate beside him, her face flushed with excitement. Yes, Lord Ainz. Go down there. Do not kill them. Incapacitate them. I want to see how they react to a being superior to their demons. Wear your full armor. Be the Valkyrie. Shaltir Bloodfallen curtsied, a terrifying smile stretching her face. It will be my pleasure, my lord. On the battlefield, Giyu and Shinobu were realizing the gravity of their situation. The giant would not die. Shinobu's poison had no effect. Giyu's attacks were shallow. The creature was healing, its necrotic energy knitting the flesh back together. They prepared for a desperate synchronized attack. A final gamble. Suddenly, the air pressure dropped. A crimson lance descended from the sky, slamming into the ground between the Slayers and the Death Knight. The shockwave blew them back, skidding across the dirt. Dust billowed, and from within it, a silhouette emerged. Clad in legendary class divine armor, crimson heavy plate that hugged her form, holding a lance that pulsed with the heartbeat of a vampire god. Shaltir Bloodfallen looked at the 2 Hashira. Is this the best the humans of this speck of dust can offer? Her voice was melodious, arrogant, and carried an undercurrent of bloodlust that made the hairs on Giyu's neck stand up. My master is watching. Try to be entertaining. Giyu tightened his grip on his sword. This aura was different. It wasn't just death. It was cold, ancient malice. It felt like standing in front of Muzan, but purer, less chaotic, more refined. Shinobu smiled, her veins bulging on her forehead from the stress. My, another one. You seem quite different from the big fellow. Shaltir didn't answer. She vanished. It was not teleportation. It was pure speed. She reappeared in front of Giyu, her lance tip resting gently against his throat. He hadn't even blinked. Too slow, she whispered. She flicked the lance. Giyu was launched backward, crashing through 3 trees before hitting a boulder. He slumped, coughing blood. His ribs were shattered. The speed difference was insurmountable. Shinobu gasped, launching a thrust at Shaltir's eyes. Shaltir caught the Nichiren blade between her thumb and forefinger. She looked at the purple steel. cute toy, SLAYER said. She snapped the blade. Shinobu stared at her broken weapon. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her heart. This was not a fight. This was an execution waiting to happen. Retreat! Giyu's voice was a ragged croak. He forced himself up, water breathing flooding his pain receptors to keep him conscious. Shinobu, run! Oh, no running, SLAYER giggled. The Lord has ordered a playdate. High above, Ainz observed the dominance. It was absolute. The power scaling of this world was now clear. The Hashira, the peak of humanity, were roughly equivalent to level 30. 35 adventurers, maybe pushing 40 with their ultimate techniques. Nazarick was a pantheon of gods descending upon a sandbox. But Ainz was not satisfied with mere victory. He needed leverage. SLAYER, bring them, Ainz commanded telepathically. And bring the remains of the Death Knight if it falls. We are leaving the area. The noise will attract more. SLAYER moved. She knocked Shinobu unconscious with a chop to the neck that moved faster than sound. She grabbed Giyu by his haori. With the slayers tucked under her arms like ragdolls, she leaped back toward the tomb. The Death Knight, obeying its programming, formed the rear guard, standing still as a statue to block any pursuit. As the sun fully rose, illuminating the scarred mountain, the first act of the tragedy concluded. The demon slayer corps had lost contact with 2 Hashira. Nazarick had secured 2 high-value prisoners and established a base of operations. But in the shadows of the forest, the true complication arose. Rui, the Lower Moon 5, stood staring at the crater where his home used to be. He was trembling, not from fear of the slayers, but from the residue of the magic he felt. It felt like father, but different. It felt like a rival father, a usurper. He turned and ran, not toward the humans, but toward the Infinity Castle. He had to tell Muzan. The logic of the blood war had changed. In the depths of the tomb, Ainz stood over the unconscious bodies of Giyu and Shinobu. He touched the hilt of the broken Nichiren blade. Analyze, he cast. The data flowed into his mind. Sun ore, high conductivity for solar energy, brittle against magic. Albedo, Ainz said softly. Yes, Lord Ainz. Prepare a message, not for these humans, but for the one they call Muzan. If he is the lord of this night, I wish to invite him to dinner. Ainz's plan was shifting. He would not hide. He would not skulk. He would present himself as a new power, a third pole in the world. He would force both sides to react to him, and in their confusion, he would find a way to control them both. The Sorcerer King had arrived, and the Taisho era would never be the same. The gears of fate ground against each other, sparks flying in the dark. The nightmare had begun. The temperature in the frozen prison on the 5th floor of Nazarick was absolute zero, a conceptual cold that bypassed the flesh and gnawed directly at the soul. Shinobu Kocho shivered, not just from the thermal shock that her high-level breathing techniques were barely holding at bay, but from the existential dread settling in her marrow. She was suspended in chains of black ice, her arms splayed, rendering her unable to reach the hidden mechanisms in her uniform. Beside her, Giyu Tomioka hung in a similar state of suspension, his head bowed, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. He was meditating, cycling his water breathing to keep his heart from stopping in the unnatural chill. They were alive. That was the first anomaly. Demons did not take prisoners for information. They took them for the larder. This place was not a larder. It was a laboratory. The sound of heavy doors grinding open broke the silence. Neuronis Painkill entered, her bloated, grey form smelling of formaldehyde and sweet rot. She giggled, a wet, mucus-filled sound, clicking her torture instruments together. Shinobu watched her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a new pathogen. The creature was repulsive, clearly demonic in aesthetic, but the energy radiating from it was different. It lacked the frantic, hungry malice of Muzan's kin. It was bureaucratic malice, just as Neuronist raised a rusted probe to Giyu's eye. A voice cut through the air like a guillotine. "That will be enough, Neuronist." The torturer froze, then dropped to her knees so fast the floor cracked. Ainz Ooal Gown stepped into the chamber. He was not wearing his battle gear, but a majestic robe of purple and gold, radiating an aura of regality that made the air feel heavy. He gestured with a skeletal hand, and the Neuronist scuttled backward into the shadows, whimpering apologies. Ainz floated closer, his red eyelights burning into Shinobu's violet orbs. He did not look like a monster about to feed. He looked like a scholar examining a rare specimen. "I apologize for the rough treatment," Ainz said. His voice had deep baritone that vibrated in their chests. "My subordinates can be overzealous. I am Ainz Ooal Gown, the master of this domain. I have questions, and unlike the creatures of this world, I am capable of reason." Shinobu forced a smile, though her lips were blue. "A reasonable skeleton. That is a new one. Are you going to eat us after the chat?" "I have no need for food," Ainz replied, dismissing the taunt. "I have analyzed your equipment. Swords made of solar conductive metal. Breathing techniques that hyper-oxygenate the blood to mimic physical reinforcement magic. You fight vampires you call demons. My question is simple. Who leads them, and where is he?" Giyu looked up, his eyes hard. "Why would we tell a demon where our enemy is? So you can ally with him?" Ainz laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Ally? You misunderstand the hierarchy. I do not ally with lower life forms. I intend to subjugate. If this Muzan is a threat to my tranquility, he will be removed. If he is useful, he will be employed. I am offering you a choice. Tell me the geopolitical landscape and I will guarantee your safety. Refuse and I will strip the information from your minds directly. The latter process is unpleasant. It tends to leave the subject as a vegetable." Shinobu analyzed the threat. He wasn't lying. The power she had witnessed, the teleportation, the nullification of attacks, the sheer scale of his fortress, meant that the Demon Slayer core was woefully outmatched. If this being aligned with Muzan, humanity was extinct. If he fought Muzan, the collateral damage could destroy Japan. She had to steer him. "Kibutsuji Muzan," Shinobu said, her voice steady. "He is the progenitor. He can change his face. He hides in the shadows. We don't know where he is. If we did, he would be dead." Ainz paused. He seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. In reality, he was consulting his memories of the anime, cross-referencing with the reality before him. He knew Muzan was paranoid. He knew about the Infinity Castle, but he needed to know if the magic systems interacted. "This, Muzan," Ainz said. "He controls his kin through blood, a hive mind." "Yes," Giyu answered. "If he dies, they all die, or so we hope." Ainz hummed. A single point of failure. How inefficient. He turned away. "Rest. You are guests of the Sorcerer Kingdom now. Do not try to escape. The guardians of this floor are not as lenient as I am." As Ainz left, the ice melted, replaced by a magical barrier. Shinobu collapsed to the floor, coughing. Giyu caught her. They exchanged a look of shared terror. They were in the belly of a beast that considered the king of demons inefficient. Hundreds of miles away, the Ubayashiki estate was a scene of controlled chaos. The Kasugai crows had delivered the news of the catastrophe at Natagumo. 2 Hashira missing, an entire mountain erased, a fortress appearing from nothing. Kagaya Ubayashiki lay in his futon, the curse spreading across his face like a purple spiderweb. He coughed blood into a handkerchief, his breathing ragged. Around him sat the remaining pillars. Sanemi Shinazugawa was pacing, his scars twitching with rage. Kyomei Himejima wept silently, his prayer beads clicking. Kyojuro Rengoku sat with his arms crossed, his expression grave but fiery. "We must attack," Sanemi snarled. "We can't just let them take Tomioka and Kocho. If it's a new upper moon, we crush it. If it's Muzan, we burn him." "It is not Muzan," Kagaya whispered. The room fell silent. The crows described a fortress of obsidian. They described knights of black iron. Muzan hides. This enemy announces itself. This is an invasion from outside our understanding. "Then what do we do, Oyakata-sama?" Mitsuri Kanroji asked, her voice trembling. "If even Shinobu-chan and Giyu-san couldn't fight back." "We wait," Kagaya said, the decision paining him. "We cannot throw our lives away against an unknown variable. We must scout. We must understand. Uzui, you are a ninja. Go to the perimeter. Do not engage. Observe. We need to know if this Ainz Ooal Gown is a demon or a god." While the humans plotted defense, the Infinity Castle was trembling with the rage of its master. Kibutsuji Muzan stood in his laboratory, smashing vials of rare reagents against the wall. His cells were screaming. The connection to the spider family at Natagumo had been severed, not by death, but by domination. He felt the exact moment the Death Knight had crushed the spider demon, and he felt the void where the soul should have returned to him. It hadn't. The soul had been consumed. Akaza, the Upper Moon 3, knelt behind him, head bowed. "Master, give the order. I will go. I will destroy this usurper." "You will do nothing," Muzan shrieked, his arm morphing into a mass of bladed whips that lashed out, decapitating a lower-ranked demon standing nearby. "You do not understand. I felt it. The energy signature. It is death. Pure death. It is not a blood demon art. It feels like the sun itself, but cold. If you go there, you might not come back. And I cannot afford to lose an upper moon to a curiosity." Muzan recomposed himself, his eyes narrowing. He needed a probe, a disposable pawn that could test the waters without endangering his core assets. He looked at the shadows. "Enmu," he commanded. The lower moon one rose from the floor, his face flushed with masochistic ecstasy. "Yes, master. Do I get more blood? Do I get to die for you?" "You will go to the Natagumo ruins," Muzan ordered. "Take the lower ranks. Take the failures. Swarm the fortress. Put them to sleep. If they sleep, kill them. If they do not sleep, observe how they kill you. I want to see their techniques." Enmu bowed low. A dream of death. How wonderful. The second catastrophe began 3 nights later. The moon was obscured by thick, unnatural clouds, generated by the weather control systems of Nazarick. The Great Tomb sat silent, a monolith of doom in the scarred landscape. Outside the walls, the forest began to move. Hundreds of demons, distorted abominations that Muzan had kept in reserve, surged toward the black walls. They were not subtle. They were a tidal wave of flesh and hunger, driven by Enmu's whispering command. Enmu stood on a distant ridge, weaving his blood demon art into the wind. Whisper of forced slumber. The magical frequency washed over the tomb. It was a potent attack, capable of putting an entire town into a coma. The waves of drowsy magic hit the walls of Nazarick and passed through. Inside the throne room, Ainz blinked. He saw a small icon flicker on his HUD. Mental attack resisted. Undead trait. He looked at the NPCs. Albedo was smiling pleasantly. Demiurge was adjusting his glasses. None of the high-level heteromorphs were affected. However, a notification popped up from the maid quarters. Several of the lower-level homunculus maids, who lacked total immunity to mind-affecting status effects, had felt drowsy. Ainz stood up. The audacity. They dared to attack his home with a sleep spell. It was an insult. It was a fly buzzing in the ear of a god. "Albedo," Ainz said, his voice cold. "It seems the neighbors are rude. They have sent a horde of mongrels to bark at our gate." "Shall I deploy the guardians, Lord Unsis?" Albedo asked, her axe materializing in her hand. "I will exterminate the vermin." "No," Ainz said. "This is a test. They want to see what we can do. If we send out our champions, we reveal our hand. We will show them the difference in the fundamental nature of our existence." Ainz teleported to the high balcony overlooking the entrance. He looked down at the swarming demons. They were clawing at the obsidian walls, their claws breaking against the magically reinforced stone. They were pathetic. Level 10. Level 15 at best. Enmu was hiding in the back. Ainz spotted him easily with life essence. "You seek to invade the domain of death." Ainz amplified his voice with magic, booming across the valley. The demons paused, looking up at the skeletal figure silhouetted against the purple lightning. "Then you shall find it." Ainz raised his staff. He did not cast a combat spell. He cast a utility spell, overcharged with the mana of a level 100 overlord. Creation. The spell took effect instantly. The area of effect was set to the entire valley. Ainz overwrote the local climate data. He changed the forest biome to frozen wasteland. The air snapped. The temperature dropped from a cool autumn night to absolute Arctic conditions in a nanosecond. The moisture in the air flash froze into razor-sharp crystals. The ground turned to permafrost. The trees that had survived the initial impact shattered like glass. The horde of demons froze, not metaphorically. Their biology, reliant on fluid dynamics and regeneration, could not cope with a temperature drop of this magnitude. Their cells ruptured. The water in their blood expanded and crystallized. Hundreds of demons turned into ice statues in the span of a heartbeat. Enmu, standing further back, screamed as his legs fused to the ground. He clawed at the earth, ripping his own flesh to escape, but the cold was relentless. It wasn't just cold. It was magical cold, carrying a slowing effect that bypassed natural resistances. High in a tree on the edge of the spell's radius, Tengen Uzui watched. The sound. Hashira had arrived just in time to witness the assault. He was shivering violently, even at this distance. He saw the flash of blue light. He saw the army of demons, creatures that required Nichiren blades to kill, simply stop. They didn't disintegrate. They just ended. "This isn't flamboyant," Tengen whispered, his teeth chattering. "This is impossible." Ainz looked down at his handiwork. The valley was now a glacier. The threat was neutralized, but he wasn't done. He wanted to test the regeneration limit. He floated down to the frozen figure of a mid-level demon, encased in ice. "Sebas," Ainz called. The butler appeared instantly. "Secure that one. The one with the mouth on its hand. Enmu. I want to see if the leader can be disconnected from the hive." Enmu was dragged into the tomb, screaming about Muzan's wrath. He was brought to the torture chamber, placed next to the cells of Giyu and Shinobu. The Hashira watched as the lower moon one, a creature that had killed dozens of slayers, was strapped to a table like a common criminal. Ainz entered the room again. He held a crystal in his hand, a data crystal from Yggdrasil. "Your biology is fascinating," Ainz told Enmu. "You are cursed, a curse that binds you to your master. If you speak his name, you die. If you fail, you die." It is a slave collar woven into your DNA. Lord Muzan is absolute, Enmu shrieked. You cannot break us. He is watching. He is... Silence, Ainz said. He placed his hand on the Enmu's chest. He cast a spell he had been saving. Greater break item. It was a gamble. In Yggdrasil, curses were treated as debuffs or equipment effects. If the Muzan cells were treated as an equipped item or a buff, this spell might shatter the connection. The effect was catastrophic. Enmu's body convulsed. Violet light erupted from his eyes/mouths. The Muzan blood within him fought the spell. It was a clash of two reality systems. The curse of Muzan tried to trigger the self-destruct sequence. Ainz's mana blocked the signal. There was a sickening tear in the spiritual fabric. Enmu screamed a sound that no living thing should make. Then, silence. Enmu lay panting on the table. He looked up. His eyes, usually etched with the rank lower one, were clear. The number was gone. The connection was gone. He was still a demon, still hungry. But the voice in his head, the constant, terrifying presence of Muzan, was silent. Ainz leaned in. Now, talk to me, and he won't know. Shinobu watched, her mouth agape. Ainz had just done the impossible. He had cured a demon, not turned it back into a human, but freed it. This changed everything. If he could sever Muzan's control, the entire demon army could be turned against him. Back in the Infinity Castle, Muzan fell to his knees, clutching his chest. He vomited a torrent of blood. A part of him had just vanished, not died, stolen. Someone had reached into his soul network and surgically removed a node. The pain was excruciating, but the fear was worse. His absolute control, the only thing that made him safe, had been breached. Nakime, Muzan screamed, his voice cracking with panic. Move the castle. Move it now. Deeper into the dimensional gap. They can touch me. They can touch me. The fortress shifted, tumbling through dimensions as its master fled in terror. Ainz stood in the torture chamber, observing the data scrolling in his vision. Target status, independent. Allegiance, neutral, hostile. He turned to Giyu and Shinobu. It seems your enemy is not as absolute as you think, Ainz said. I have just acquired a new subject. Now, I have a proposition. You want to kill this Muzan. I want to secure my domain. It seems our goals align. I am willing to release one of you to carry a message to your leader. Giyu and Shinobu looked at each other. The choice was impossible, but the reality was undeniable. The game had changed. The demon slayers were no longer the only hunters in the night. The Sorcerer King had entered the war, and he had just fired the first shot that truly mattered. I will go, Giyu said, standing up. Shinobu is the doctor. She can learn more here. If you are truly reasonable, you will let me take this message to Ubayashiki-sama. Very well, Ainz said. Tell him that Ainz Ooal Gown sends his regards. And tell him that if he wants to win this war, he will come to me, not as a warrior, but as a petitioner. Ainz opened a gate. It led directly to the outskirts of the Ubayashiki estate. He knew the location because he had extracted the visual memory from Enmu's mind. Enmu, who had spent decades hunting for the headquarters. Giyu stepped through the portal. He looked back one last time at Shinobu, then at the skeletal god. He stepped out into the night air of the Ubayashiki estate, carrying a message that would shatter the world order. The alliance of necessity was about to begin, forged in the freezing cold of a spell that could rewrite geography. The era of the breathing swordsman was over. The era of magic had begun. The return of Giyu Tomioka to the headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps was not the return of a hero, but the arrival of a ghost carrying a plague of impossible truths. He did not run. He walked with the stiff, mechanical gait of a man whose worldview had been shattered and imperfectly reassembled. The Ubayashiki estate, usually a sanctuary of wisteria and silence, felt fragile to him now, like a paper house standing in the path of a hurricane. When he knelt before Kagaya Ubayashiki, the other pillars were already gathered, their presence a suffocating wall of tension. Sanemi Shinazugawa watched him, with eyes that twitched with suppressed violence, smelling the foreign scent of the tomb on Giyu's uniform, a scent of dry ice, old dust, and formaldehyde. Giyu spoke for an hour. He described the freezing of the mountain, the casually godlike power of the skeletal caster, and the terrifying paralysis of the lower moon. But when he delivered the core of the message, that Ainz Ooal Gown had severed the blood connection between Muzan and his servant, effectively curing the demon of its servitude, the reaction was not hope. It was a volatile mixture of denial and horror. Sanemi erupted first, his scar-riddled face twisting as he slammed his fist into the tatami mats. He accused Giyu of falling under a blood demon art, of being a puppet sent to sow discord. The idea that a demon could be anything other than a monster to be killed was an insult to every grave Sanemi had ever dug. Obanai Ikuro sat in the shadows of the ceiling beams, his serpent hissing, his voice dripping with skepticism, as he pointed out the strategic absurdity of a third party possessing such power without ever being recorded in history. But it was Gyome Himejima, the stone Hashira, who wept silently, his large hands clasping his prayer beads until they cracked. He did not weep for the news, but for the truth he heard in Giyu's heartbeat. Giyu was not lying, and that meant the war they had been fighting for 1,000 years had just been rendered obsolete. If demons could be cured, every swing of a Nichiren blade was no longer an act of justice, but a tragedy. The moral clarity of their crusade had been assassinated by a skeleton on a throne. Kagaya Ubayashiki silenced the room not with a shout, but with a sudden, violent coughing fit that splattered the white sheets with fresh blood. His wife wiped his lips, her face pale. Kagaya looked at his children, his blind eyes seeing further than any of them. He understood what Ainz Ooal Gown was doing. This was not an offer of alliance. It was a destabilization tactic. By proving that demons were victims of a solvable condition, the Sorcerer King had weaponized the Slayer's own empathy against them. If they continued to kill without hesitation, they were murderers. If they hesitated, they died. It was a checkmate of the soul. Kagaya whispered his command, his voice frail but absolute. They would not attack Nazarick. They would not attack Muzan. They would observe. They had to know if the cure was reproducible or a singular miracle. He ordered Kyojuro Rengoku and Tengen Uzui to the capital, to Tokyo. The crows had reported strange movements there, and if this new entity sought influence, the seat of human power would be his next target. The Demon Slayer Corps was no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to understand the rules of a new reality. Deep within the shifting geometry of the Infinity Castle, fear had transmuted into a cold, frantic malignance. Kibutsuji Muzan paced the tatami of a room that defied gravity, walking on the ceiling as his mind raced through calculations that no longer added up. The loss of Enmu was not a loss of a soldier. It was a loss of security. The silence in his head where Enmu's voice used to be was deafening. It proved that his biological supremacy, the cornerstone of his existence, was vulnerable. He could not hide in the shadows if his own creations could be turned into tracking beacons. Muzan came to a conclusion that terrified him, but was logically inescapable. The masquerade was a liability. He had spent a millennium hiding from the sun and the humans to avoid detection. But this new enemy, this Ainz, did not care about secrecy. Ainz had announced himself. If Muzan continued to hide, Ainz would simply conquer the human world and root him out with the resources of a nation. Muzan had to seize the board. He had to flood the zone. He summoned the upper moons. They arrived not with their usual arrogance, but with a palpable unease, sensing the chaotic frequency of their master's blood. Kokushibo, the upper rank one, knelt with the stillness of a statue, his 6 eyes processing the distress of his progenitor. Doma, upper rank 2, smiled his vapid, hollow smile, fanning himself, while Akaza, upper rank 3, looked ready to fight the air itself. Muzan did not give them a speech. He gave them an overdose of his blood. He forced so much power into their systems that their bodies warped and cracked before knitting back together, stronger, faster, and more volatile. He gave them a single directive that broke the oldest law of their kind. Do not hide. Go to Tokyo. Go to the heart of human civilization. Slaughter the leadership. Burn the government buildings. Turn the populace into demons by the thousands. Create so much chaos, so much noise, that the Sorcerer King's senses are blinded by the static. Muzan intended to use humanity as a chaff cloud. If the humans were busy fighting a zombie apocalypse in their capital, Ainz Ooal Gown would be forced to expend resources stabilizing the region, buying Muzan time to find the blue spider lily, or a way to kill the overlord. In the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the mood was one of industrious conquest. Ainz sat in his office, buried under a mountain of reports from Demiurge. The strategic shift was well underway. Nazarick was not expanding its borders. It was expanding its intelligence network. Sebastien had been deployed to the capital to gather information on human governance and the location of this blue spider lily the prisoner Enmu had mentioned. Ainz found the flower's description intriguing, a plant that defied valid taxonomy. If it held power, he wanted it. But more importantly, Ainz was concerned about the world-class item theory, the existence of a being like Muzan, who could grant powers and biological immortality, smelled like the lingering effect of a twisted item from Yggdrasil. Ainz decided he needed to draw out the holder. He approved Demiurge's plan for Operation Gehenna, but with a modification. They would not play the villain, they would play the savior. The escalation began on a Tuesday evening in the Asakusa district of Tokyo. It started with a scream that was quickly drowned out by the tearing of metal. Akaza dropped from the sky into the middle of a busy intersection, his impact cratering the pavement and sending a streetcar flying into a storefront. He did not speak. He did not gloat. He simply began to kill. He moved with a speed that the human eye could not track, his fists punching through brick walls and human bodies with equal indifference. But unlike his usual duel-seeking behavior, this was indiscriminate destruction. He was destroying the infrastructure. He punched the support pillars of buildings, collapsing them onto the screaming crowds. Within minutes, the district was a ruin of dust and blood. Blocks away, Doma entered a high society gala. He didn't break in. He walked in, smiling, his fans scattering ice dust that was actually frozen blood poison. The elite of the Taisho era, politicians, generals, industrialists, breathed in the glittering powder and began to cough up their lungs. Doma danced among them, decapitating the guards with casual flicks of his fans, laughing about the tragedy of life. He wasn't just killing them, he was absorbing them, consuming their memories, their influence, their secrets. The leadership of Japan was being hollowed out in a single night. The police arrived and died. The army was mobilized, bringing bolt-action rifles and early artillery, but against upper moons, they were less than insects. Akaza caught tank shells with his bare hands and threw them back. The explosions lit up the Tokyo skyline, turning the night into a hellscape of fire and shadows. The panic was absolute. The modern world of steam and electricity was colliding with the ancient world of blood and magic, and the modern world was breaking. Kyojuro Rengoku and Tengen Uzui arrived in the chaos, sprinting across the rooftops of the burning city. What they saw stopped them cold. This was not a hunt. This was a war. The scale of the destruction was beyond anything the Slayer Corps had ever handled. Rengoku didn't hesitate. He drew his blade, his spirit burning brighter than the fires consuming Asakusa. He zeroed in on Akaza, the source of the greatest devastation. Tengen broke off to engage Doma, his sound breathing echoing off the crumbling buildings. Rengoku crashed into Akaza with the force of a meteor. Flame breathing, first form, unknowing fire. The strike was perfect. A decapitation slashed time to the microsecond. But Akaza didn't dodge. He shifted his neck, letting the blade cut halfway through, and trapped the sword in his muscle. He grinned, his face regenerative steam hissing. "You are strong, Kyojuro, but not strong enough for tonight." Akaza kicked Rengoku in the stomach, a blow that would have disemboweled a normal man. Rengoku held his ground, digging his feet into the pavement, and ripped his sword free, unleashing a torrent of flame. They clashed, a blur of red and blue, destroying the street around them. But the difference was clear. Akaza was stronger than before. Muzan's blood had pushed him to a new threshold. Rengoku was being pushed back, his wounds accumulating, his breathing ragged. Meanwhile, Tengen Uzui was dying. He had engaged Doma, but the ice demon was a hard counter to the sound Hashira. Doma's ice clones overwhelmed Tengen, freezing his bombs before they could detonate, chilling the air so severely that Tengen's lungs threatened to freeze with every breath. Doma played with him, giggling, tearing strips of flesh from the shinobi's arms. "You're so loud," Doma chirped. "But silence is golden, don't you think?" A wave of ice spikes erupted from the ground, impaling Tengen's left leg and pinning him to a wall. Doma raised a fan to finish him. It was then that the third player entered the game. The sky above Tokyo turned black. Not the black of night, but the black of a void. A massive magical circle, complex and glowing with purple runes, manifested over the Asakusa district. The temperature didn't drop, it stabilized. The fires didn't go out, they turned green. A gate opened in the air, and from it descended a figure clad in the armor of a dark knight, a hero from a storybook, riding a beast of shadow. It was Momon, the dark hero, but Ainz knew that Momon couldn't handle this alone. He needed a show of force that bridged the gap between warrior and magic. He had brought the Pleiades, and he had brought Sebas. Sebastian landed between Doma and Tengen. The impact was silent, a testament to perfect Kai control. Doma paused, tilting his head. "Oh, a grandpa's. Are you lost?" Seba adjusted his glove. His eyes were cold, filled with a righteous fury that transcended species. He had seen the bodies of the civilians. He had seen the children crushed under the rubble. For a being created with a sense of justice, this was intolerable. "You are a stain," Seba said, his voice level. "You lack the dignity of a predator. You are merely a disease." Doma smiled and swung his fan, sending a cloud of razor ice at Seba. Seba stepped forward. He punched the air. The shockwave of the punch, infused with monk ki, didn't just disperse the ice. It atomized it. The force continued, hitting Doma in the chest. The upper moon too exploded. His torso simply vanished, turned to mist by the pressure. Tengen, bleeding and half-conscious, stared with his one good eye. The regeneration of the demon was instant. Doma reforming yards away, looking surprised. That hurt. That actually hurt. What are you? I am the Iron Fist of Nazarick, Sebas declared. He vanished, reappearing instantly in front of Doma. A flurry of blows ensued, faster than sound, each punch carrying the weight of a cannonball. Doma couldn't use his blood demon art because his hands were being shattered faster than they could reform. Sebas was not fighting with a technique Doma recognized. It wasn't breathing. It was raw stats, backed by a level 100 monk build, optimized for hand-to-hand combat. Sebas grabbed Doma's face and slammed him into the pavement, the crater expanding for 50 feet. Across the district, Akaza felt the shift. He felt a presence that eclipsed Rengoku's battle spirit. He looked up to see a massive insectoid warrior descending from the sky, exhaling a cloud of frost that rivaled the Arctic. Cocytus had arrived. Ainz, floating above the city under an invisibility spell, observed the battlefield. He was calculating. The demon slayers were brave. He gave them that. Rengoku was fighting with a hole in his gut, but they were inefficient. He spoke into the comms. Cocytus, Sebas, do not kill them yet. Drive them back. I want the humans to see us saving them. I want the government to owe us. Cocytus landed in front of Akaza, interposing his massive forearm frame between the demon and the exhausted flame Hashira. Akaza stopped, his compass needle spinning wildly. He looked at Cocytus, at the exoskeleton, the 4 weapons, the aura of the frozen hell. A warrior, Akaza breathed, his obsession triggering. You are not human. I am the sword of the Supreme. One, Cocytus rumbled, his voice like grinding glaciers. He held a halberd and a katana. You fight well for a savage, but your technique is flawed. Akaza laughed, a sound of pure joy, and lunged. Cocytus didn't use magic. He used technique. He parried Akaza's destructive death compass needle with a single fluid motion of his katana, the god-slaying emperor blade. The parry was so perfect it threw Akaza off balance. Cocytus followed with a blunt strike from the haft of his halberd, sending Akaza skipping across the rooftops like a stone on the water. Rengoku, leaning on his sword, watched in disbelief. Who are you people? Cocytus glanced back, his compound eyes unreadable. Rest, human, we will handle the vermin. The battle for Tokyo turned into a rout. The upper moons, empowered as they were facing level 100 NPCs equipped with divine class gear. The gap was not just in power, it was in equipment and versatility. Doma, realizing he couldn't freeze Sebas, who had high resistance, and couldn't outspeed him, decided to retreat. He dissolved into a mist of ice and fled into the sewers. Akaza, recognizing that Cocytus was a wall he could not climb in a single night, and obeying Muzan's survival instinct, retreated as well, vowing to return for a proper duel. The silence that followed was heavy. Tokyo was burning, but the monsters were gone. The survivors began to crawl out of the rubble, looking up at the figures standing amidst the destruction. Sebastian helped Tengen Uzui to his feet, infusing him with a minor healing key to stop the bleeding. Cocytus stood guard over Rengoku. And then, Ainz made his move. He dropped the invisibility. He descended slowly, his robes glowing, his staff radiating authority. He landed in the center of the devastation, where the Prime Minister's residence used to be. The press, the army survivors, the slayers, they all looked at him. I am Ainz Ooal Gown, he announced. his voice amplified to cover the entire district. I see that this world is plagued by a sickness. Your government cannot protect you. Your hunters, he gestured to Rengoku and Tengen, are brave, but they are overwhelmed. I offer you a new path. I offer you protection. Under my banner, the night is no longer something to fear. It was a political checkmate. By saving the capital when the traditional powers failed, Ainz had delegitimized the Japanese government and the Demon Slayer Corps in one stroke. He hadn't conquered Japan. He had made it dependent on him. Kagaya Ubayashiki, receiving the report via crow miles away, closed his eyes. The chain reaction was complete. The secrecy was gone. The public now knew about demons, and they knew about the Sorcerer King. The Demon Slayer Corps could no longer operate in the shadows. There were now a public militia, and a second-rate one at that. But in the shadows of the retreat, a different kind of horror was blooming. Akaza, fleeing through the forests, clutched his chest. He was not injured, but he was confused. During the fight, Cocytus had spoken to him not as a monster, but as a warrior. He had critiqued his form. He had shown him respect. For a creature whose memories were repressed, this interaction struck a chord of dissonance. Muzan's blood demanded obedience, but Akaza's soul, buried under layers of curse, began to vibrate with a question. Why did the monster in the ice feel more honorable than the master in the dark? And deep in the ruins of the Nataguma mountain, where Nazarick sat, a small, overlooked detail began to fester. The cure Ahmed performed on Enmu was not a singular event. The magical residue of that spell had drifted into the ecosystem. A wild demon, a starving lower-rank wretch, ate a patch of grass contaminated by the spell's runoff. It convulsed, it screamed, and then it went silent. Its connection to Muzan flickered. It didn't break, but it thinned. The exclusivity of the demon race was dissolving. Ainz hadn't just introduced a new power. He had introduced a pathogen. The absolute control of Kibutsuji Muzan was beginning to rot from the outside in. The sun rose over a Tokyo that would never be the same. The rising sun flag still flew, but in the hearts of the people, the flag that mattered was the one that Ainz Ooal Gown was about to unfurl. The flag of the Sorcerer Kingdom. The war for the night was over. The war for the world had just begun, and the humans were no longer the players. They were the prize. The next move belonged to the government, and in their desperation, they would make a choice that would doom them all. They would try to weaponize the sun. They would tell Ainz about the blue spider lily. Ainz sat on a temporary throne conjured in the ruins of the Dyad building. Sebas knelt before him. Lord Ainz, Sebas said, the humans are asking for an audience. Let them wait, Ainz said, looking at the map of Japan. I am waiting for the other guests, the ones with the swords. He was waiting for the Hashira, not to kill them, but to hire them. The ultimate insult to the legacy of the demon slayers, to become the salaried employees of the overlord of death. The sound of a contract being drafted. The escalation had reached its peak. Now came the assimilation. The bureaucracy of the Sorcerer Kingdom was a sharper blade than any Nichiren sword. In the weeks following the Battle of Asakusa, the integration of the Japanese government into the administrative apparatus of Nazarick proceeded with terrifying smoothness. There were no mass executions, no public displays of cruelty. Instead, there were permits. There were zoning laws. There were grain distribution centers manned by death knights who did not sleep and did not take bribes. The chaos of the Taisho era, plagued by poverty and hidden monsters, was replaced by a suffocating absolute order. The citizens of Tokyo, initially terrified, began to accept the undead sentinels as a fact of life. A death knight did not demand taxes. It only demanded obedience. For the average peasant, it was an improvement. For the Demon Slayer core, it was a slow strangulation. The core was not destroyed. It was rendered redundant. The requests for Slayer assistance dropped by 90%. Villagers that once begged for a Mizunoto to save them from a minor demon now simply petitioned the local Elder Lich, who would dispatch a Soul Eater to consume the threat. The economy of fear that sustained the core was bankrupt. Kagaya Ubayashiki, bedridden and failing, understood that they were facing a threat that could not be decapitated. They were being outcompeted. In a desperate bid to remain relevant, the Hashira were summoned to a meeting not at the headquarters, but at the newly constructed embassy of the Sorcerer Kingdom in the heart of Tokyo. It was a building of marble and obsidian, defying the architectural limits of the era. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of lavender and ozone. Albedo sat at the head of the negotiation table, her smile perfect and terrifying. Opposite her sat the remaining pillars, Sanemi, Gyome, Obanai, Mitsuri, and Moichiro. Giyu and Shinobu were present as liaisons, wearing uniforms that blended the Slayer Haori with the crest of Ainz Ooal Gown. The visual betrayal made Sanemi grip the hilt of his sword until his knuckles turned white. Albedo placed the document on the table. It was not a surrender treaty. It was a procurement order. The Sorcerer King acknowledges your bravery, Albedo purred, her finger tracing the seal on the paper. But your methods are archaic. You rely on artisans who strike metal with hammers while praying to spirits. It is inefficient. We offer you a partnership. You provide us with the location of your swordsmith village and the raw ore deposits. In exchange, we will retool your armory. We will provide you with weapons forged using the advanced metallurgical techniques of Nazarick. Weapons that do not chip. Weapons that do not rust. Weapons worthy of the soldiers of Lord Ainz. The small choice lay on the table. It was a choice between tradition and survival. The Slayers were running out of swords. The battles with the Upper Moons had shattered their stockpiles, and the logistics of moving steel through a country controlled by undead checkpoints were impossible. To refuse was to fight with dull blades. To accept was to hand over their most sacred secret. We cannot, Sanemi snarled. The village is sacred. The forging is a ritual. You can't just... The ritual is why you are losing. Albedo cut him off, her voice losing its warmth. While you pray over a piece of steel, the creatures of the night evolve. We are offering you the means to kill them. Do you want to save lives, or do you want to play blacksmith? Gyome. Himejima wept, his tears tracing paths through the dust on his face. He sensed the truth in her words. The core was exhausted. They were fighting a war of attrition they had already lost. If we give you the village, Gyome rumbled, will you guarantee the safety of the smiths? They will be employed, Albedo said, and they will be productive. It was a capitulation of necessity. Gyome nodded. The location was written down. The coordinates of the hidden village, the most guarded secret of the organization for centuries, were handed over to a succubus in a Tokyo boardroom. It seemed like a logistical decision. It was, in fact, the death of the Demon Slayer Corps' soul. The occupation of the swordsmith village was swift. It was not an invasion, but an efficiency audit. Demiurge arrived with a retinue of evil lords and construction golems. He did not kill the smiths. He reorganized them. The erratic, individualistic scheduling of the masters, who worked only when the mood struck them, was replaced by a rigid shift system. The chaotic layout of the forges was raised and replaced with a factory floor plan, optimized for heat distribution. The distinct, personality-driven forging process, where a smith poured his emotions into the blade, was identified as a quality control variance. Demiurge introduced molds. He introduced hydraulic presses powered by magic. He introduced a new alloy mix, blending the crimson ore with adamantite from Nazarick. The production rate soared by 3,000%. Within a week, crates of the new Type 99 standard Nichirin blades were shipped to the Slayers. The swords were magnificent. They were identical, flawless, and sharper than anything a human hand could hone. They shimmered with a faint magical aura. The Slayers who received them marveled at the balance. They felt lighter. They cut through testing bamboo like it was smoke. Even Sanemi, testing the edge, had to admit the craftsmanship was superior. But in the rush for efficiency, a metaphysical variable had been overlooked. Ainz Ooal Gown came from Yggdrasil, a world of hard data and stats. The Demon Slayer universe operated on animism, the belief that objects possess spirits, and that the will of the user infused the weapon. The red blade phenomenon, the only thing capable of halting the regeneration of an upper moon, required the steel to heat up through the sheer grip strength and fighting spirit of the user. The new Nazarick alloy was heat resistant. It was designed to never warp or overheat. It was chemically incapable of turning red. The consequences of this small technological upgrade did not manifest immediately. It took the form of a catastrophe when Kibutsuji Muzan, sensing the shift in the world's balance, made his own desperate move. Muzan had realized he could not outpower Ainz. He had to outmaneuver him. He needed the blue spider lily, but he also needed to degrade Ainz's assets. He launched a probing attack on the Slayer headquarters, leading the assault himself for the first time in centuries. It was a rainy night when the perimeter alarms of the Ubayashiki estate triggered. This was not a stealth mission. Muzan walked through the front gate, flanked by the newly promoted upper moons, demons created from the most twisted spirits of the criminal underworld, pumped full of blood until they were walking bombs. The Hashira, now armed with their Type 99 blades, moved to intercept. They were confident. They had the ultimate weapons. They had the training. Muichiro Tokito was the first to engage. The mist Hashira moved like smoke, his speed enhanced by the stat-boosting rings Albedo had provided. He slashed at Muzan's neck, a strike that should have severed the demon head clean off. The blade connected. It passed through the flesh with zero resistance. It was too sharp. It didn't even drag. Muzan's head fell off, and then it reattached instantly. Muichiro frowned. He struck again and again. He turned Muzan into confetti, but there was no burning. There was no slowing of the regeneration. The wounds closed as fast as the blade created them. The sun energy stored in the ore was trapped within the matrix of the adamantite alloy. The metal was too stable to release the solar radiation required to burn the cells. Muichiro was holding a masterwork razor, but against Muzan, he needed a soldering iron. "Your swords," Muzan noted, his voice echoing with amusement as he reformed from a pile of gore. "They are cold. They have no heat. They have no hatred." Muzan lashed out with a whip arm. Muichiro blocked. The Type 99 blade held. It didn't break, but the force of the blow, undiminished by any burning effect on the demon, transferred directly into Muichiro's small frame. He was launched into the main house, crashing through 3 walls. Sanemi and Obanai attacked in tandem. Wind breathing, 9th form. Serpent breathing, 5th form. They unleashed a hurricane of slashes. They were faster than they had ever been, their movements assisted by the magical gear. They flayed Muzan alive, but the damage output was zero. The regeneration was outpacing the damage because the biological cauterization of the Nichiren steel was gone. They were fighting a flood with a knife. "Why isn't he burning?" Sanemi screamed, his eyes wide with panic. He squeezed his hilt, trying to force the red blade, trying to pour his burning rage into the steel. The adamantite handle remained cool to the touch. It insulted him with its perfection. It refused to conduct his soul. "Because you sold your spirit for sharpness," Muzan hissed. He expanded, his flesh turning into a maw of teeth and bone. "You are no longer slayers. You are just men with sharp sticks." The slaughter began. Without the ability to inflict lasting damage, the Hashira were on the defensive. They could not kill. They could only delay. And against a being with infinite stamina, delay was death. Mitsuri Kanroji fell first, her new flexible sword tangling in Muzan's mass, but failing to burn her way out. She was crushed, her ribs snapping, saved only by Gyome pulling her out of the way at the last second. It was at this moment of absolute despair that the second small choice spiraled into disaster. Tanjiro Kamado, who had refused the new weapons, arrived on the scene. He was carrying his old, chipped, hand-forged sword. He saw the Hashira failing. He saw the invulnerability of the Demon King. He understood instantly what had happened. He smelled the lack of fire in the new blades. He knew he had to act, but he also knew he wasn't strong enough. He had one card left to play. Earlier that week, Ainz had given Tanjiro a generic summon item, a small horn, telling him to use it only in dire need. "It will call for help," Ainz had said. Tanjiro, desperate to save the Ubayashiki family, blew the horn. He expected a death knight. He expected Sebas. Instead, the horn summoned the goblin army of Enri Emmett via a scroll link Ainz had established for testing. A portal opened, and 50 high-level goblins marched out. They were disciplined, strong, and well-armed. But they were monsters. To the terrified, curse-addled eyes of Kagaya Ubayashiki, watching from his porch, this was not salvation. He saw demons fighting demons. He saw his children, the slayers, standing amidst a horde of goblins, fighting alongside monsters. The distinction between the core and the enemy dissolved in his mind. The stress was too much. The curse that had been eating his brain for years finally snapped the last thread of sanity. Kagaya laughed. It was a broken, wheezing sound. "They are all demons," he whispered. "We have already lost." Kagaya detonated the explosives rigged underneath the estate. He had planned this for Muzan. But in his delirium, he triggered it early, while the Hashira were still in the blast radius, while the goblins were deploying, while Tanjiro was rushing forward. The explosion was massive. It engulfed the courtyard. The spikes of wisteria-laced iron hidden in the explosive charge flew out in all directions. The blast did not kill Muzan. He shielded himself with a cocoon of flesh. It did not kill the goblins. Their armor saved them. But it devastated the Hashira. Sanemi, Obanai, and Gyome were blown back, riddled with shrapnel. Shrapnel coated in poison meant for demons, which burned their human blood. They lay in the burning ruins of their ancestral home, betrayed not by the enemy, but by the collapse of their own leadership's mind. Muzan emerged from the fire, unscathed but furious. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the slayers writhing in the dust, poisoned by their own trap. And then he looked at Tanjiro, who had been shielded by a goblin paladin. Muzan smiled. It was a genuine smile. "The Sorcerer King has made you weak," Muzan said. "He gave you toys and took away your teeth. I have no need to kill you now. You are broken." Muzan turned and left. He didn't flee. He walked away. He had confirmed what he needed to know. The Slayer core was no longer a threat. The only threat was Ainz, and by destroying the Slayer's effectiveness, Ainz had inadvertently removed the only pawn on the board capable of delivering sun damage. Ainz watched the replay of the battle via the remote mirror in Nazarick. He sat in silence. The efficiency of the new swords was mathematically perfect. The failure was contextual. He had applied Yggdrasil logic, higher stats equal sign better, to a world where conceptual affinity, some properties, mattered more. I miscalculated, Ainz said softly. Albedo looked worried. Lord Ainz, shall we deploy the floor guardians to finish Muzan? No, Ainz said. Muzan has realized he cannot win a direct fight. He will not engage us again. He will go for the alternative victory condition. Which is? The blue spider lily, Ainz said. And now that the Slayers are incapacitated, we are the only ones looking for it. But there is a problem. What problem? The explosion. Ainz pointed to the screen. It destroyed the archives of the Ubayashiki estate. The only record of the lily's location was in that house. Silence reigned in the throne room. The small choice to modernize the swords led to the tactical failure of the Hashira. The small choice to give Tanjiro a summon horn led to the psychological break of the leader and the destruction of the vital intelligence. The map was blank again, but the consequences were rippling out. In the ruins of the estate, Tanjiro stood up. He looked at the goblin paladin that had saved him. The creature had a green face and tusks, but its eyes were kind. It offered him a hand. Tanjiro looked at the burning mansion, then at his broken friends. He took the goblin's hand. The barrier between human and monster had officially fallen. Tanjiro Kamado, the last hope of the old world, had just been drafted into the Sorcerer Kingdom's army. He had no choice. Nazarick was the only roof left. But deep in the mountains, a new horror was stirring. The wisteria poison from the explosion had vaporized, entering the atmosphere. It mixed with the strange magical residue of the goblin portal. The clouds above Japan began to change color. A purple rain began to fall. Wherever the rain touched, the demons did not die. They mutated. The weakness to wisteria was being forcefully overwritten by a magical, chaotic adaptation. The lower-ranked demons began to scream as their cells reconfigured. They were losing their intelligence, but gaining a resistance. The ecosystem was reacting to the foreign magic. The sound of rain hissing on the hot stones of the ruined estate. The heroes were defeated by their own upgrade. The villain was loose, and the world itself was beginning to reject the laws of biology. The final convergence was approaching, and it would not be a duel. It would be a harvest. The purple rain that fell upon Japan was not merely a weather phenomenon, but a biological rewrite of the ecosystem. It hissed as it touched the pavement of Tokyo, carrying the distinct sweet scent of rotting wisteria and the metallic tang of chaotic mana. In the countryside, the effects were immediate and grotesque. The low-level demons, those pathetic creatures that usually hid in the shadows fearing the dawn, did not die. Instead, the wisteria poison, corrupted by the magical fallout from the goblin portal and the explosion at the Ubayashiki estate, acted as a mutagen. Their flesh bubbled and hardened, turning from regenerative tissue into calcified armor plating. Their intelligence, already primitive, was wiped clean, replaced by a singular, rabid aggression. They ceased to be demons of the Kazuki line and became roaming beasts, immune to the sun but stripped of the ability to speak or plan. They were no longer the soldiers of Muzan. They were a natural disaster, a plague of hungry stone and teeth that swept through the villages, ignoring the warding incense that had protected humanity for centuries. Ainz Ooal Gown stood on the balcony of the Sorcerer Kingdom's embassy, watching the toxic downpour. The red lights of his eyes dimmed in contemplation. The situation had deteriorated beyond the parameters of a controlled conquest. He had intended to subjugate the Demon Slayer core and isolate Muzan, but the suicide of Kagaya Ubayashiki had introduced a variable of chaotic desperation he had not anticipated. The destruction of the archives meant the location of the blue spider lily was lost, and the mutating demon population meant that the safe zones he had established were under siege. He was no longer playing a strategy game. He was managing a biological apocalypse. Albedo stood behind him, her face a mask of concern, not for the humans, but for the annoyance this caused her master. She suggested a world item activation, a mass wipe of the island to sanitize the area. Ainz refused. To destroy the board was to admit defeat. He needed to extract the value from this world, and the value lay in the unique biology of the progenitor. Deep in the mountainous crater where Nazarick had first arrived, Kibutsuji Muzan stood amidst the wreckage of the forest. He was naked, his clothes burned away by his own evolving aura. The rain touched his skin and sizzled, absorbed instantly into his matrix. He did not fear the rain. He felt the chaos within it, and he drank it. The destruction of the Slayer core had liberated him. For 1,000 years, he had been paranoid, always looking over his shoulder for a red blade or a sun-breathing swordsman. Now, they were gone. The Hashira were broken, poisoned, and demoralized. The threats were neutralized. All that remained was the skeleton, and in the silence of his own mind, free from the constant chatter of his lower moons, Muzan had an epiphany. He looked at the ground beneath his feet. The soil here was black, dead, and saturated with the negative energy of the tomb. And there, growing from the ribcage of a buried death knight, was a flower. It was not red. It was blue. The blue spider lily did not bloom in the sun. It did not bloom in the shade. It bloomed in the presence of death. It required a soil so saturated with necrotic energy that it mimicked the underworld. Muzan laughed. He had spent centuries searching for a flower that only grew in conditions he was terrified to create. He had avoided death, fled from it, when he should have embraced it. He plucked the flower. It was cold to the touch. He did not hesitate. He swallowed it whole. The reaction was not spiritual. It was nuclear. The cells of Kibutsuji Muzan, already pushed to the brink by his experiments and the consumption of the corrupted rain, accepted the data of the lily. The genetic lock that prevented him from walking in the sun shattered. His body convulsed, expanding, tearing, and reforming. He did not become a giant monster. He compressed. His skin turned a pale alabaster white, shining with an inner iridescence. His eyes turned gold. He looked up at the purple clouds, and with a mere thought he blew them away. The sun shone down on him. It burned, but it was a pleasant burn, like a warm bath. He had conquered the sun. He was the perfect being, and he felt the presence of the only other being worthy of his attention. He looked toward Tokyo. Inside the medical wing of Nazarick, Tanjiro Kamado sat on the edge of a bed, his hands trembling. He was dressed in the tunic of a Sorcerer Kingdom conscript. His injuries from the explosion had been healed by high-tier magic, leaving no scars, but the phantom pain remained. He looked at the sword leaning against the wall. It was a Type 99 Nichirin blade, stamped with the crest of Ainz Ooal Gown. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but to Tanjiro, it felt like a dead thing. It had no soul. He thought of Nezuko. She was safe, kept in a containment field on the 6th floor, but she was changing too. The atmospheric mana was making her stronger, more distant. The humanity he had fought so hard to preserve in her was being eroded by the sheer magical density of their new home. He realized with a sinking heart that the Demon Slayer story was over. There was no cure coming. There was only adaptation. The alarm klaxons of Nazarick blared, a sound that transcended sound, vibrating directly in the bones of every occupant. Ainz Ooal Gown teleported to the throne room, checking the surveillance feeds. The sensors were screaming. A high-energy signature was approaching Tokyo at Mach speeds. It wasn't flying, it was jumping. The impact tremors were registering as localized earthquakes. Ainz saw the image on the main screen. It was Muzan, but the data box next to him was glitching. Level, unknown. Race, ultimate life form. Weakness, none. Ainz felt a cold sweat he physically couldn't produce. This was the world boss scenario. The enemy had achieved its win condition. Muzan had conquered the sun. If Ainz did not stop him here, Muzan would consume everything. Humans, resources, and eventually, the tomb itself. He ordered the floor guardians to deploy. This was not a drill. This was a defense of the guild. The confrontation took place in the ruins of the Shinjuku district, a wasteland of concrete skeletons and twisted metal. Ainz stood at the center of the intersection, surrounded by Albedo, Cocytus, Mar, and Aura. Behind them, the Death Knights formed a phalanx. Muzan landed 500 meters away. He did not crash. He touched down with the lightness of a feather. He wore a suit materialized from his own flesh, immaculate and white. Ainz Ooal Gown, Muzan spoke. His voice carried no malice, only the absolute crushing weight of superiority. I must thank you. Your presence fertilized the soil. Your fortress provided the shade. You gave me the key to perfection. You are welcome, Ainz replied, his voice amplified by magic. However, I find your definition of perfection lacking. You are merely a biological anomaly. A tumor that has forgotten it is part of a body. Muzan smiled. Words from a dead thing. I am life evolved. I will consume you, and I will add your magic to my biology. I will become a god in truth, not just in name. Muzan moved. It was not speed. It was instant transmission via biological propulsion. He was in front of Albedo in a microsecond. Albedo, the tank of Nazarick, raised her axe. Muzan punched it. The divine class item did not break, but the force of the blow created a vacuum tunnel that stretched for 3 miles behind her. Albedo was sent skidding back, her heels carving trenches in the bedrock. She gasped, her arms numb. Physical immunity. He had bypassed her defense stats with sheer kinetic overload. Cocytus stepped in, swinging his god-slaying blade. Muzan caught the blade with 2 fingers. The edge, capable of cutting space, stopped dead against Muzan's skin. Muzan flicked his wrist, and Cocytus was flung into a skyscraper, the building collapsing on top of him. Magic, Ainz commanded. Maximize magic. Reality slash. The spell, a high-tier dimension cutter, flew toward Muzan. It struck his chest. A wound opened, a deep, gashing tear in reality. But before the blood could spill, the wound zipped shut. The regeneration was faster than the rendering of the damage. Muzan didn't even flinch. He walked forward, his eyes locked on Ainz. Your tricks are slow, Muzan said. My cells adapt to the mana frequency the moment it touches me. I am immune to that spell now. Ainz retreated, teleporting backward. This was bad. This was very bad. Muzan was adapting like a Borg drone, but with the speed of a shonen protagonist. Physical attacks were useless. Magical attacks worked once, then were nullified. Ainz needed to buy time. Ma, Aura, distract him. The twins unleashed their beasts. Huge level 90 monsters, dragons, hydras, giant fenrirs, charged Muzan. It was a slaughter. Muzan didn't fight them. He absorbed them. He lashed out with whips of flesh that pierced the scales of the dragons, drinking their biomass in seconds. The monsters shriveled and turned to dust. Muzan grew larger, his aura shifting, taking on the elemental properties of the beasts he consumed. He breathed fire. He generated lightning. He was becoming a raid boss with dynamic phases. Tanjiro watched from the safety of a remote viewing screen in the embassy. He saw the hopelessness. He saw the gods of Nazarick being pushed back by the devil he had sworn to kill. He gripped the hilt of his Type 99 sword. He stood up. He had to go, not to fight, but to witness. He felt a pull, a strange resonance. The sun breathing he had mastered. It wasn't just a technique. It was a memory of the sun, and Muzan was now the sun. Back on the battlefield, Ainz realized he had one option. He could not win a war of attrition. He could not outdamage the regeneration. He had to bypass the concept of life entirely. He needed to use the trump card of the overlord. But the cast time was 12 seconds. 12 seconds against a being that moved faster than thought. "Albedo, Sebas, everyone," Ainz screamed, dropping his regal facade. "Buy me 12 seconds. Even if you die, buy me the time." The Guardians heard the fear in their master's voice, and it drove them into a frenzy. They did not fight to win. They fought to obstruct. Albedo tackled Muzan, abandoning all defense, grappling him with her limbs. Sebas punched Muzan's eyes, blinding him for a fraction of a second. Demiurge summoned walls of hellfire. Cocytus returned, missing an arm, and swung with his remaining limbs. Muzan roared, annoyed. He expanded, his body erupting into 1,000 bladed tendrils. He skewered Sebas. He tore Albedo's wings. He ripped through the defense. But the mass of bodies slowed him down. He was wading through high-level meat. Ainz stood behind the wall of his dying children. The clock in his head ticked down. 10, 9, 8. He activated the skill. The clock face appeared behind him. The goal of all life is death. The air in Shinjuku turned grey. The color drained from the world. The purple clouds, the red fires, the blue sky. Everything turned into a monochrome stillness. The sound of battle ceased. Muzan paused. He felt something he had not felt in 1,000 years. He felt the end. He looked at the skeleton. The clock hand ticked. Widen magic, cry of the banshee. Ainz screamed. It was not a vocal scream. It was a wave of instant death magic, expanded to a radius of 2 kilometers. The wave hit Muzan. Usually, Muzan would resist instant death. His vitality was infinite. But the goal of all life is death ignored immunities. It did not kill the body. It killed the concept of the existence. It told the universe that, for this specific entity, the time had run out. Muzan's eyes widened. He tried to regenerate, but the regeneration died. The cells that tried to divide died. The blood that tried to pump died. The very air around him died, turning into a vacuum. The concrete he stood on died, turning to sand. "This is impossible," Muzan gasped. His alabaster skin turned grey. Cracks formed, not of injury but of age. He was aging 1 billion years in a second. The blue spider lily within him withered. The perfection rotted. Tanjiro arrived on the edge of the crater just in time to see it. He saw the Demon King, the invincible monster, crumble. He didn't explode. He didn't scream. He simply turned into dust. A pile of grey, lifeless ash that was instantly scattered by the shockwave of the spell's completion. But the spell did not stop at Muzan. The grey wave washed over the district. It hit the surviving demons in the area. The mutated, stone-skinned beasts. They fell over, dead instantly. It hit the trees. They turned to ash. It hit the bacteria in the soil. The land died. A perfect circle of absolute death was carved into the heart of Tokyo. Albedo, Sebas, and Coquitus fell to the ground. They were revived instantly by their resurrection items, gasping for air, their bodies knitting back together. But Ainz fell to his knees. His mana bar was empty. The mental fatigue was crushing. He had won, but he looked at the ash. The curse of the demons was linked to Muzan. When he died, the connection snapped. Across Japan, thousands of demons, those who had not been mutated by the rain, simply disintegrated. The war was over in a heartbeat. But the mutated ones, the ones who had been changed by the goblin magic and the wisteria rain, they did not die. They had been severed from Muzan days ago. They were a new species, and they were everywhere. Tanjiro walked down the slope of the crater. The air was thin and tasted of stale dust. He approached Ainz. The overlord looked up. "It is done," Ainz said, his voice hollow. "Your enemy is gone." Tanjiro looked to the spot where Muzan had stood. There was nothing left. No body to bury, no final words. Just a void. He looked at his sword. He dropped it. "He is gone," Tanjiro whispered. "But so is everything else." Tanjiro looked at the horizon. The sun was setting. For the first time in history, the night that was coming did not belong to Muzan. But it did not belong to humans either. The mutated beasts began to howl in the distance. They were not organized. They were not intelligent. But there were millions of them. The ecosystem of Japan had been shattered. The natural order was gone. Ainz stood up, his regal composure returning with effort. "We have work to do, Tanjiro. The cleanup will be extensive. We must build walls. We must establish production zones. Humanity is endangered. I will place them under my protection." "Protection?" Tanjiro laughed, a broken sound. "You mean a zoo?" "Call it what you will," Ainz said, turning his back. "It is survival. The world you knew is dead. I am the only order left." Ainz opened a gate. The guardians limped through. Tanjiro stood alone in the dead zone for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the earrings. The Hanafuda earrings. He looked at them. They were symbols of the sun. But the sun had been conquered, and then the conqueror had been executed by death. The symbol meant nothing now. Tanjiro took off the earrings and dropped them into the grey dust. He turned and followed the Skeleton King into the portal. The era of the Demon Slayer was over. The era of the Sorcerer Kingdom had begun. The humans would live in the domed cities of Irantel and Tokyo, safe, fed, and managed. The outside world belonged to the mutants and the monsters of Nazarick. The history books would record that the Demon King was defeated, but they would not record that the heroes had won. They would only record that management had changed hands. In the silence of the dead zone, the Hanafuda earrings lay covered in ash. Slowly, the grey dust buried them completely. The sun set, and the darkness was absolute. The year is 1974 according to the old calendar, but the official records designate it as year 55 of the Sorcerer era. The skyline of Neo-Tokyo is a jagged silhouette of Gothic spires and brutalist concrete, illuminated not by electricity, but by the soft, rhythmic pulse of mana conduits that run through the streets like blue veins. The air is clean, scrubbed of pollution by the druidic circles managing the weather, but it tastes sterile, recycled through the massive filtration wards that cover the metropolitan dome. Down on the street level, the citizens move with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. There is no poverty. There is no crime. The sick are healed by low-tier priests in public clinics, and the hungry are fed from the grain silos filled by undead labor. It is a utopia of absolute security, guarded by death knights wearing synthetic riot armor, their tower shields replaced by transparent mana barriers. In the basement of the Department of Human History, an old man sits at a steel desk. His hair is white, thin, and wispy, and the scar on his forehead has deepened into a crater, looking like a dried riverbed. Tanjiro Kamado is the head archivist of the pre-arrival era. He does not carry a sword. Private ownership of weapons is a capital offense. Instead, he holds a stylus, carefully digitizing the crumbling paper records of the Demon Slayer Corps. He picks up a faded photograph, the edges brown and brittle. It shows a group of young men and women in colorful haori, smiling under a wisteria tree. He runs his thumb over the face of Zenitsu Agatsuma. Zenitsu had died 20 years ago, a wealthy merchant in the Sorcerer Kingdom. Happy, but always afraid of the knights. Inosuke had refused the cages. He had run into the wild lands and was never seen again, presumably eaten by the mutants. A young clerk enters the room. She is human, but she wears cosmetic horn implants, a fashion trend meant to emulate the beauty of the overseer Albedo. She drops a stack of files on Tanjiro's desk. She glances at the photo and asks if those were the primitive rebels who opposed the Supreme One. Tanjiro smiles, a gesture that feels heavy on his face. He tells her no. He tells her they were just people who tried to breathe. She shrugs, uninterested in the ramblings of a relic, and leaves. Tanjiro places the photo in the scanner. The light flashes, and the physical copy is shredded, replaced by a permanent data file in the Nazarick server. Outside the city walls, the world belongs to the monsters. The Japanese countryside is a lush, overgrown wilderness where the wisteria beasts roam. These mutated descendants of the demon race are apex predators, immune to magic and sunlight, forcing humanity to remain locked in their protected zones. The trains that travel between the cities are armored dreadnoughts, bristling with spell turrets to fend off the wildlife. The mountains where Tanjiro once sold charcoal are now prohibited zones, used as hunting grounds by the dark elves of the 6th floor. Deep within the Great Tomb, which now sits as the capital building of the world government, Ainz Ooal Gown sits on his throne. He does not sleep. He does not age. He reviews the quarterly reports on mana efficiency and population growth. He has succeeded. He has saved humanity from the tyranny of Muzan and the chaos of the Taisho era. He has brought peace. But as he looks at the holographic map of his empire, he feels the crushing weight of eternity. There are no more enemies. There are no more adventurers. He has won the game, and now he must endure the victory. On his desk, enclosed in a diamond glass case, sits a blue spider lily. It is perfectly preserved. It is not used for potions. It is not used for power. It is used as a paperweight for tax documents. The flower that drove a millennium of slaughter is now a mundane decoration in the office of a lonely god. The sun sets over the Sorcerer Kingdom, casting long shadows that never truly fade, and the world spins on, safe, cold, and quiet.